Hey folks, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you, you can unlock unlimited access to political news, to get commentary, opinion, and a whole lot more at inforum.news/port for only 99 cents a month for your first 3 months. Hurry, get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes, empowering our vehicles, to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. And this episode, we're going to be talking with State Representative Emily O'Brien. I think we all remember last year during the legislative session, something pretty extraordinary happened. In fact, was the first time in state history that it happened. A state lawmaker was expelled from the legislature. It's important to say former Representative Luke Simons was expelled for harassing people, and what led up to it actually was some of my reporting. I had gotten wind of an altercation between him and another couple of lawmakers, a couple of Democrats. Not that matters one way or the other. They were in the legislature's cafeteria at the time. There was a mask requirement, and Mr. Simons wasn't wearing his mask. He got into a vulgar, bit of a shouting match with these two lawmakers. I got wind of it. I wanted to report on it. And during the course of reporting on it, somebody said, hey, you should request some documents about Mr. Simons' interactions with legislative staff. And I did. I got a stack of documents that was maybe 15 pages documenting instances of harassment that had taken place over the course of years. Including the harassment of our guest, Representative O'Brien. And I always have to mention at this point that Chad Oban is my co-host. I always forget that part because I forget to introduce him, and then he gets salty, and then the episode's not.
Super salty. It's just like I'm just this voice coming from nowhere on the podcast when you don't introduce me.
Well, let's talk with Representative O'Brien. Thanks for making the time for us today. And what occasioned me inviting you on is that the legislature is going to be considering making some changes to how they handle situations like this, which I think is needed. And that's not necessarily a besmirchment on the rules that were created before. I think it's just very, very clear those rules weren't good enough when we need more. Would you agree?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I think when it was first initially drafted and presented in 2018, it was a one-size-fits-all kind of model. And when, not having any situations presented where the policy was put it to work, I think there, was discrepancies and things that can definitely be improved upon. I think some people interpreted differently, which is always a commonality. I think when we're going through any process in the legislature is everything is up for interpretation, and how do you, approach it? How do you view it? How do we go through the process and making sure you're following all the proper channels to get there? And so I think in June is when the committee is meeting and, reevaluating where some of the gaps or where the loopholes were that people felt need to be tightened up.
Let me jump. I know Chad's got a question, but I really want to start this because one of the controversies around Luke Simons being expelled, the argument from Luke Simons supporters was that the legislature didn't follow its existing process. Like they said, well, we have these policies in place, and they claim we didn't follow them because there should have been a hearing and there should have been more due process. And instead, the legislature basically formed a committee of the whole, said, we believe the accusations, and then acting as the House voted to expel him. Are they right? Do they have a point, Emily?
And I tread lightly with how I answer that because that is not the case whatsoever. We absolutely followed the process. It was a committee of the whole. That was the hearing. That was the process. The legislature absolutely followed everything to a T on how the whole situation should have been handled. Maybe in the beginning, the people did the reporting. For myself, in 2016, 2017. I'm trying to remember what year it was. I can't believe it's already 2022. When I first got into the House with some of the comments and the things that were happening, when I had reported them to our House caucus leader at the time, Mike LaFleur, I'm like, what do I do? Who do I say? And he's like, we need to go talk to Al Carlson. And we did. And then Al had told me that it would get taken care of, who was the majority leader at the time. And I just left it at that. Didn't follow up, didn't hear anything back. The comments still kept coming, but I just, shut them off. I think that the way that the process was handled that day, absolutely. Luke wanted to have a hearing. Luke wanted to have the conversation with his accusers, and he chose not to take that route. It wasn't, he wasn't being charged with anything. He wasn't going through the courts process. This was strictly on behavior and choosing not to correct that behavior.
So, Representative O'Brien, first of all, thanks for having this conversation. Also, thanks for standing up last session. I thought when you stood up on the floor and faced Luke the way you did was really powerful stuff. And
you and Representative Brandy Pyle as well.
Yep,
both just remarkably courageous. Sorry to interject.
Absolutely. One of the things that I thought, in full disclosure, you both know that I'm married to a state senator. And I think Erin and I have talked a lot about this issue since she was elected in 2014. And I think that, sometimes we focus too much on Luke Simons when it comes to this issue, because I don't think either party has a monopoly on this sort of behavior, or the Bastiat caucus has a monopoly on this sort of behavior. And so I think when we start talking about policy, it's really important that there is not that wiggle room, because it really comes down to, you even talked about, the time going to Al Carlson. It really comes down to leaders making the decision to do right. And I think that moving somebody's desk on the House floor, or saying a legislator can't work with legislative council staff, I think ultimately this ended in a really good place. I question some of the things that could have happened earlier in that. So what do you think? Obviously the policy alone isn't going to fix this problem. What do you think can be done to make sure leadership is acting more quickly on these things? Because I think, by and large, our leadership is people who look a lot more like Rob and I than look like you, who maybe don't experience the same thing that female legislators and female staff experience. How do we hold elected or leadership accountable to make sure they're acting right away when these things start to come up?
Well, and that's the biggest thing, is acting right away. Talking with even, my boyfriend or my parents, it's like kids. When you're in a leadership role and you don't correct that behavior that reflects on the group. So if you have a family member that's acting in one way or another and you don't act on that, and you continue to let that behavior to happen and it's not getting corrected, you're going to have problems down the road, and it's going to be problematic. And I think, especially with a lot of new leadership changes coming up next session, I definitely think it's going to be on people's radar that's going to be one of the criteria, what people are looking for in leadership, to, hold their feet to the fire and make sure that things are happening and they're holding their word. Now, everything's on social media and recorded, and you can go play back, hey, no, you said you were going to say this. And I get teased a lot in the legislature because I'm always taking notes, and I document everything in the committee hearings and what we're doing, because that's how I remember, what's happening that day. We hear so many different topics and subjects, having that documentation and then getting it to the appropriate parties, but making sure those appropriate parties are doing what they say they're going to do is going to be extremely vital. I hope we don't ever have another sexual harassment situation, but we need to, this isn't one of the knee-jerk reaction things. It's something that was, I think, long overdue, especially only being introduced in 2018. I think it's something that we have to keep our head on a swivel. And there isn't, like you said, Chad, a one size fits all. There has to be specifics and follow that.
I think one of the complicating factors here is, I mean, normally we talk about sexual harassment. A lot of it happens in an employer environment where you have a very specific hierarchy, you have employees and you have management, and it becomes, I think, in some ways simpler. In the legislature, we're dealing with elected officials who are not hired. Like, the majority leader didn't hire Luke Simons or any other member of the legislature. It would be easier, in fact, if it was a member of legislative council that was doing the harassment, because they're an employee and they could be acted upon. Acting upon somebody who has a mandate from voters, that's a difficult thing, which made Luke Simons' expulsion so extraordinary, because it was the legislature overriding the voters of his district. So that was remarkable. But in my mind, like, for instance, what happens if Luke Simons gets reelected? What if he runs for that office again and gets elected to the legislature again? What then? He's been expelled at one point for harassing. He's clearly not repentant, at least not at this point. So, I mean, how would any policy that the legislature devises deal with that situation? Do you expel him again?
Well, and that's a great question. You know, I think it's a day-by-day thing. You take it as it comes, and that's, I think, a part of reviewing this policy and how do we approach those things. When Luke was expelled that day, because I went in that morning with an open mind of, you know, is he going to be remorseful, and how do we have these conversations, you know, to help correct this behavior? And it was more of a opportunity for him to, you know, look at me, I'm the victim here. And to me, it was just really shocking and stunning, just the back and forth conversations of what he was almost having with himself on the floor and in the media and on his Facebook page of how he was going to approach it. So, I mean, with Luke, if he decided to run again or get elected, I think that would be, you know, up to interpretation for his voters of the district and for the people of North Dakota on how they want to approach it, and legislative leadership.
Yeah, and I think, again, I worry that if Luke Simons hadn't had his meltdown in the lunchroom and telling two of your colleagues to, you know, F off, that this would have never happened. I think that created sort of a domino effect of Rob getting this report, other people feeling comfortable coming out. What I worry about is Luke Simons is an easy person in the legislature to kick out of the legislature. He's not particularly liked. He's sort of weird and socially awkward. Weird might be the wrong word. That's probably.
Yeah, but I'm weird and socially awkward. All right, let's.
Yeah, so I think it would be easy to kick out as well, as if you made mistakes like this. But no, but in all seriousness, I think the question becomes, what happens when it's a friend of the majority leader who's on the appropriations committee or the chair of a committee or something like that? Is it the same response? I mean, I think we focus too much on Luke Simons, because I don't think it's just Luke Simons. His were just a lot more aggressive and loud than a lot of the other stuff that goes on up there. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, can a policy fix what comes down to a good old boys network, not to use Governor Burgum's words too much, but I mean, and it's not just a legislative thing either, right? It's a societal thing. And so what happens when it's not Luke Simons?
And let's also, I mean, just I don't mean to interject before you answer, Emily, but she said something really interesting in the recent Bismarck Tribune article about the legislature. You said that a lot of people who have been harassed have been contacting you, thanking you for telling your story, thanking you for standing up on this, and a lot of those people have been men. So it's not just a female issue, and I thought that was a really important thing that you pointed out.
Yeah. So, Chad, for your statement and question, it starts at home. You know, raising decent humans. I think about it with, you know, my daughter and my boyfriend's 3 kids. How do you raise decent humans to treat others the way that they want to be treated? That's been literally my motto since kindergarten, when I went to a private Catholic school, and it was, literally on the door when you walked in and out of the classroom every day. And like, that's just always stuck in my head, is treat others the way you want to be treated. And to instill that in our kids, to treat others, you know, would you like it if someone came up to you and started talking to you that way? Probably not. Okay, then maybe don't go that route. So it's everywhere. And, you know, from a business perspective, I don't think a lot of the people that made the nasty comments, or legislators that own businesses that voted the way they did, I have a hard time believing they would tolerate that in their business operations. And then, Rob, to your point, yes, I had a lot of people surprisingly send me private text messages, phone calls, emails, handwritten letters, both positive and negative. And it was extremely interesting to receive notes and messages from people that were men that, you know, hey, I had the same experience. One gentleman said that Luke referred to him as a thoroughbred, a beautiful thoroughbred. So he was, you know, calling him a beautiful horse, and he didn't know what to say or do. And it was consistent. So that was in out in the oil field in 2016, 2017. But a lot of people, you know, wanted to come after me they wanted to sue me. I was called the C word from multiple people. I had some people call me over 30 times. 2 gentlemen called me over about 30 times. You know, whether it was 9:30 at night, 6:30 in the morning, a Sunday morning at 8 a.m. It was all over the place. And, you know, how I dress unbecomingly, and I asked for it. And it was just really interesting, the broad spectrum of commentary that I received after the fact.
You know, it's to your point about, you know, it starts at home. I mean, I think that's a really good answer. It's also a really complicated answer, because what do you do? I mean, for, you know, my scenario where Simons gets reelected to the legislature, or somebody else in the future who, you know, maybe has a harassment problem and then gets reelected despite it. I mean, the electorate has shown a willingness to tolerate some truly atrocious behavior from its elected officials, both at the national level and, you know, down to the local level. And as proof of it is you were harassed by Luke Simons, and then in the process of talking about that harassment and being a part of the group of people that did something about it, were subsequently harassed again by people who are clearly fine with it.
Well, and Rob, I would also just add, it's become a litmus test on the GOP side of things. I mean, what we're seeing at conventions often, how you voted on the Luke Simons thing is a litmus
lawmakers
test.
Were sent earlier, not to interrupt, but earlier, lawmakers were being censured for, in part, voting to expel Luke Simons.
Yeah, and you and I have talked a lot about, is that really the hill you want to die on, is standing up for Luke Simons? Sorry,
even Emily. People that didn't, no, I was just going to say, even people that didn't get to vote on it were censured because they had guilt by association.
State senators were censured for the Luke Simons vote, and it was an action of, obviously, the House. It was a House member. So,
and two Senate bills that they were censuring them on, those senators voted the way that these people that were censuring wanted them to. So they got 100% according to these guys that were censuring, but they still censured them for getting 100%. It's a little backwards, if you ask me. And to be honest, this, you know, it does start at home, but if you see something, do something. And for me, that all of the people that had reached out after my statement, to me, it was a no-brainer for those people that didn't have a voice that day. Faculty, staff in the building, interns, legislative counsel that, you know, had reached out saying, thank you so much, because that happened to me as well. That was a you have to do something moment, and, you know, make sure that this is carried out appropriately and the conversations are had. And I don't mean carried out appropriately by moving forward with the expulsion, because I really genuinely went in that day open-minded. I was sitting in the transportation committee up until like 4 minutes before floor session started, just like, you know, okay, we're going to go in, and I hope this, ends up in the best way possible.
So I think, Representative O'Brien, you brought up something interesting earlier in terms of leadership at the legislature, and we're going to have, a changing of the leadership in both chambers. And you said that this is, going to be top of mind for a lot of people, and I hope it is. And I hope some of the conversations that take place with people who want to lead your caucus is, have you ever participated in this sort of behavior? Have you ever seen this type of behavior? And what did you do about it? It's not just about promising what you're going to do in the future, but there's people that have been there a long time that have, seen some things and probably, see something, say something, probably haven't said much. So I hope that your caucuses will take that into consideration. That was not a question, that was my comment. The next thing I want to just sort of say is, I think when women get elected to the legislature, there's often a desire to be able to show that you belong, and particularly younger people. And maybe it's not even gender, but younger people want to belong and show that you can hang with the guys that have been there a long time. Do you think that is one of the obstacles for women and potentially men as well to come forward in these situations, that you don't want to be seen as a whiner, you don't want to be seen as somebody who's upending the system? I mean, have you heard that from people?
I mean, I haven't heard that from anyone, but, my own firsthand experience, I think it's, again, similar to any type of business where you want, if, you're there for policy and public service, but if you want to work your way up, you have to prove yourself, prove that you know what you're doing, prove that you know the facts, prove that you can, come up with good ideas and make changes, and not necessarily just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And that's, a part of the process anywhere you go, that, if you want something, you have to work for it. Nothing's given to you. But there definitely is, for my own observations, that not anyone else's words, but there is definitely a little bit of that goes on.
So let's talk specific policies. Well, what in terms of a harassment policy, and understanding all the difficulties we just talked about, that again, we're not dealing with an employee-employer situation. These are elected officials. What can the legislature do to make things better?
And that's been the question of the hour for me, honestly, since that day. How do we, approach this? We go through that hypothetical situation when we do the orientation for the legislature, and because we go over examples of what are some sexual workplace harassment scenarios, but not necessarily what the outcomes could be of those scenarios. And I think, we've used both men and women in the sexual harassment situations as examples, but again, just not what that process is and what the possible repercussions could potentially be. I don't think anyone thought that there, would be severe issues such as this. I think people know that there's issues, but I think they've always been able to be handled and corrected. And maybe not always, but.
And I think one of the things that came from the Luke Simons thing is, I hope that people take that training a little more seriously, because I think there was, this doesn't happen here, that sort of attitude about things. And it's just something that we have to do to check the box. I hope last session changed that in terms of people taking that seriously. And I also want to give a quick shout out to Senator Kathy Hogan, who's led on this from 2018 to try to get a policy on the books. To your point earlier, Emily, the fact that it took until 2018 to get a policy is pretty crazy.
It is. It really is crazy, because it's any, basic HR 101. I mean, we learn it in college, and I think, you can even learn it in high school, your junior and senior level classes on no means no. Maybe that was even in 8th, 9th, or 10th grade.
Well, one thing that was really interesting to me, because listen, I know a lot about what happens at the legislature. I talk to a lot of people. I pay attention because it's my job. I pay attention certainly more than the average voter. And I kind of knew Luke Simons had a reputation for being a jerk, but just kind of thought it was just a political reputation, not grounded in something like this. And the moment I found out about it, obviously I reported it, right? I covered it. But it surprised me, right? I didn't know it was there. And maybe that's just a product where even somebody who covers it as closely as I do, I'm still the media. So people are going to modulate their behavior around me, and they're going to be thinking about the sort of things that they tell me. Because obviously if you tell me, hey, somebody's harassing other people, I'm going to do something about it because I'm the media. That's my job. But that for me was the part of the story that it just... When I started talking to people and started really asking, pointed where it was clear I knew something was up and I had some documents in hand and people started opening up about it, was remarkable. And I mean, you spoke with me, Brandy Pyle spoke with me, but then also, I talked with a lot of people who ultimately didn't want to make their stories public because, they felt by that point, Simons was on his way out and they didn't feel like they had to. And I respect that decision, but I guess that surprised me. It did surprise me. And maybe I'm Pollyannish. Maybe I'm too optimistic. I'm not cynical enough about how people behave. But that surprised even me, who, again, I watch this stuff closely.
Well, and I wasn't, to be honest, I think that the situation happened on a Friday with individuals and Luke in the lunchroom. So it came out that evening because we were driving back home. Yeah. I don't even think I'd read the article yet. And it was a late afternoon session, I believe, too. So we were there late, and I think I got home. I know it was dark. And I had a couple people contact me and call me saying, Emily, we know about your story. And, you talked to us about it in 2016, 2017. You have to say something because this is a repetitive behavior and pattern, and nothing is changing. And hearing multiple other stories, again, it's not something that you can just sit on the sidelines and let just happen. And I understand too, some people that want to remain anonymous because of that retaliation and intimidation factor, because it is scary and daunting. I mean, I work my boyfriend owns a commercial painting and drywall business. I've heard every colorful term, phrase you can think of on a job site, but I have no problem telling those people, almost putting them in their place. Like, you don't talk like that to people. Like and they just literally, their face turns white and they're like, oh God, you're right. Don't talk like that ever again. But again, it's a behavioral thing that I think starts at a young age. And how do you figure out how to turn and correct that? Sometimes you can teach an old dog new tricks. Sometimes you can't.
Yeah, Rob, I'm a little shocked that you were shocked by this or didn't see it coming.
I think shock's the wrong word. I think I don't know. It did surprise me. I guess it did surprise me.
Stunned at the extremeness.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm just and maybe it's being close to it or whatever, but I mean, it didn't surprise me at all. Maybe it surprised me that it was Luke Simons. Maybe it surprised me that he started yelling at people to F off in such a public way. But I think this sort of casual sexual harassment that takes place at the Capitol is not surprising at all to me.
And I think you got to, I have a very unique relationship in that I don't socialize with these people. And that's on purpose. Because I have to write about people like Emily O'Brien. Right. So Emily and O'Brien and I are never going to go hang out together or anything like that because I have a job to do with respect to the job that she does. And so I don't socialize. And so maybe that's why, I don't see the stuff because I'm not hanging out at the bar with everybody. Maybe that's why it surprised me. I'm being very candid here. It did surprise me. Although I will say, anybody, if you have something to report about this, I will tell your story. Call me and I will tell it.
But I think the other thing at play here is, it's 80 days. It's very intense. There's lots of alcohol flowing at different times. Obviously, it does not forgive the behavior at all. And it doesn't just happen at the bar. It happens at the Capitol as well.
Yeah.
But I think, there's just so many signs that this kind of stuff is taking place. And again, I've said this now 8 times probably during this interview. This isn't just about Luke Simons.
Right.
This policy has to be about other people as well.
Sure.
And people who have been there for a long time who do casual stuff that maybe isn't appropriate. It's not screaming and yelling somebody to F off in the cafeteria, but there's other stuff that goes on that has to stop. And I hope that this is a lesson, policy or no policy, that people need to do better.
And I think, just to add in my 2 cents, I don't necessarily think it happens over drinks or when people are going out after hours, because I rarely go out during session. Usually I'm busy working after we're done, honestly, till you can find me in the committee rooms or on the in the House floor working on my laptop till 10, 11, 11:30 at night. It's when people are going to get their cup of coffee in the morning and they're walking by your desk. It's when people are getting set up in committee rooms and are, trying to get situated, or see you walking by in the hallway. It's in passing. It's when it's least expected, and it takes you off guard. And I think, like in the lunchroom, when you're, in the cafeteria at the Capitol, or when I'm sitting at my desk and, their desk is 3 desks behind me and they walk right by me every time when they come back from lunch. So it's anytime. It's, Luke was calling, according to the reports from individuals in Legislative Council, he was calling them on the weekends, or weekend or whatever it was, random days. I don't remember if it was weekends or weekdays, doesn't matter. Calling them and asking them, what kind of underwear, size underwear do you wear? I mean, I couldn't even imagine having a call or any sort of solicited message like that from anyone. I mean, it's disturbing. And I also thought that it was interesting is some of the supporters for Luke, after a lot of the harassment that I received, wanted to, say that another situation I had was at the University of North Dakota. Those claims were false. I had, 0 credibility. And the reason why they found no substantial claims was because I wasn't willing to give all of my documents and my notes and my supporting information that I had worked on to them. They spent $2,500 on 5 attorneys and would call me 20 minutes before they were in Grand Forks, North Dakota, driving up from Minneapolis, no heads up. Hey, can you meet? I'm like, what? No. And so some of those people just don't want to hear the full story and jump to conclusion and only hear what they want to hear. And that was definitely an experience that we had on the floor that day, was people only heard what they wanted to hear. People that were watching or reading the articles only read and listened to what they wanted to hear, not both sides.
So, Emily, I just want to clarify that I wasn't suggesting that the alcohol and going to the bars has anything to do with you or other people. I just using that as an example, but I agree it's mostly what happens casually at the Capitol that's problematic. But I just wanted to clarify that point because Aaron listens to this, and I would probably get yelled at when I get home. So go ahead, Rob.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, it can happen anywhere. There's nothing wrong with socializing with people. I mean, there's nothing wrong with lawmakers. In fact, you would encourage it, right? I think we all need to talk to each other more, not less. But anyway, Emily, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you having the courage to talk about something that's just gross to begin with. And terrible that it put you in that situation, but really thank you for speaking out, because without people like you speaking about it, I don't know how we find a way to make it better. So I really appreciate that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Emily.
Yes, thank you both. And Chad, don't worry, I knew what you meant, but I thought it would be important to clarify it happens any day, anytime, anywhere. And I think sometimes it's hard to have these tough conversations, but that's why we do what we do and make the big bucks, right?
Well, that's our interview with Representative Emily O'Brien. And I mean, listen, Jen, I don't envy them the task of trying to create these policies, because it's not easy. I mean, on one hand, I think we want to be tough on this kind of behavior. On the other hand, I don't want to create a mechanism through which people, because the legislature is a hothouse. People are tempted to use these sorts of things for partisan recrimination. How do you protect against people using it in bad faith? That's not. Well, I'm glad I don't have to come up with the policies.
Yeah, and I talked to Aaron 2 nights ago about this, and I said, okay, so what should this policy do, and what should a leader do in these situations? And her response, because I don't know, and and I'm a manager of people, and I want to make sure I'm doing stuff right. But her response was very interesting. It was very much, well, it depends. It depends on the situation. And so to try to craft a policy that fits everybody is so very difficult, because there's human beings that are involved in this stuff.
You're trying to craft an objective policy that then gets applied to extremely subjective situations.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think Emily talking about it starts at home, and that might be a little naive, but at the end of the day, it goes to a lot of things that you and I talk about. Just be nice to each other. Just treat each other well. And again, that's probably naive.
And when someone behaves badly, be willing to hold them accountable, even if it's somebody you otherwise like. If it's an elected official, I think that's a big part of the problem. Is there's no shame anymore, and without that, sometimes public shame serves a very specific, a very useful purpose. And if we don't have it, it's chaos.
And I also think, there's some folks who are like, well, I've never heard of this happening up here. Well, some people aren't exactly approachable when it comes to talking about these kind of issues for people like Representative O'Brien and others. Some are great, but again, it comes down to people doing right and doing the right thing. And
regardless of politics,
I hope it gets better.
I do. Yep. So let's talk about something. I had a little kerfuffle with the state Democratic Party this week. Listen, I want to be honest. I wrote about it because I think it's important. That's part of my job, is to shine a light on how political figures behave. Right? That's part of the job. So I didn't expect this. Starting about 5 weeks ago, I was emailing the state Democratic Party trying to get credentials for their upcoming convention, which is right in my backyard here in Minot. And I sent emails to the same email address they had listed for information about the convention. I think it's people@demnpl.com. Emailed that, didn't receive a response. Thought, okay, sometimes those catch-all emails can be hit and miss. So, I get press releases from the state party. I emailed the communications director. She didn't respond to me. So this week, I just called Party HQ. I left them a voicemail. The second time I called, somebody picked up the phone and hung up. I'm assuming they had caller ID, right? I'm not trying to hide who I am. My name comes up when I call. And then finally they sent me an email saying they weren't going to give me credentials because of COVID protocols, which seems like bunk to me, because they're not limiting attendance at the convention in any other way, just apparently limiting it in the way of issuing me media credentials. So I wrote about it because I thought it was baloney, the way they were behaving. And Chad, you were former executive director of the party. I wanted to get your 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I think I do my best not to be overly critical of the state Democratic Party, the executive directors, the chair people, because I know firsthand how difficult those jobs are and how everybody has an opinion and by and large don't do a lot to help. I would say that this was probably handled in a way that I would have handled it differently now. But I've thought a lot about how I would have handled that exact thing in 2014, when, we were sort of in a different political landscape. We had Senator Heitkamp, who you were pretty critical of over the years. And I would like to think that I would have responded differently. I think that I would have, in the sense of I would have talked to you. I think one of the things that I think came across in the article was, if you're going to shoot somebody down, have the tough conversation. Do I think they should have shot you down? No. I think we're in a much different place in 2022 than, where we have been historically. I've actually talked to a lot of people in the last couple of days. What would Rob Port have seen at the convention that would be worse for the Democratic Party than the column that he wrote? And just the simple cost benefit analysis of letting you in versus that column, which I think was fair for you to write, completely fair. I don't understand the strategy behind it. I think that they should have let you in. I think that you've proven in the last several years your bona fides of taking both sides on in a good way. And again, what do Dems have to lose at this point by letting anybody into their convention?
That was one thing I was thinking about is and I'm not saying this to be insulting, but there's really not going to be any competitive races. They're not going to get a ton of media coverage as it is. Even if it's critical media coverage, at least somebody's talking about you, because that's a real struggle for the state party right now, is even being part of the conversation in the state, because what's going on in the Republican Party sucks all the oxygen out of the room. I wanted to come. I wanted to observe what they were doing. I wanted to write about it. I would think, even understanding that I'm coming from a conservative perspective and I'm probably going to be critical, right? I mean, why is that? Why? That's not necessarily a bad thing for them.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I would also just point out that, you know, if you had a conversation with Josh Boucher or Aaron Oban or Joan Heckerman or Carla Rose Hansen and others, I'm guessing you'd find a lot of area to agree on right now, because I think a lot of their frustration is with that same segment of the Republican Party that you have frustration with. And so I think, in the Trump era, I think any organization like a political party needs to make sure they're not just talking to themselves. Quite frankly, it's the reason why I agreed to do this podcast with you, Rob, is that I think it's important people with maybe a little different perspective don't just talk to ourselves on social media, but hopefully have conversations with people who are different than us and help persuade them to our position. And so, again, I try not to be too critical of them. I don't understand the strategy here. Maybe there was a strategy, but my one criticism would be is have a conversation, answer the damn phone, talk to a person, tell them what's going on. I don't understand that. I mean, in your column, you indicated that somebody picked up and hung up. I mean, come on, we're adults here.
And one thing I just want to point out, I mean, obviously I'm the media, so I think I should have access to everything, right?
Yeah, it's a private organization, though, so you understand that they do have control over that.
I understand, and I can even understand why they credential. Like if I was Alex Jones for InfoWars and I was going to come there and be disruptive, then sure, maybe I shouldn't get credentials. I can understand that. I don't think that's my track record, though. I'm not going to be sitting in the back shouting or disrupting things or trying to accost people. I would have been there. I would have observed. I would have written my columns. I mean, as I've done at every Republican convention since, 2004. And by the way, Joel Heitkamp is at every Republican convention. So if we want to talk about letting in people who are going to be critical, literally the brother of a former U.S. senator, was at the time getting media credentials for the NDGOP convention. That, to me, that's the standard. That's how you do it, right? Because like what he has to say about Republicans or not, right? He is a legitimate member of the news media and should be allowed in.
When I was a little surprised that you didn't go to the Dem conventions like back in 2018 when Biden was there, or when Clayton was there and whatever. I was actually surprised that this is the first time in a long time that we've tried to go.
Part of it is just the scheduling. Like they're always back-to-back weekends, and that was tough just for me personally, like with a family to get away for 2 weekends. I mean, that makes it was just hard. At one time I think they were even held on the same weekend, which and so it always came down to me, like I had to make a choice between the conventions just as a personal level. Because remember also, the majority of my career, I was operating on my own budget, right? I wasn't necessarily employed to do these things. So it just wasn't very easy to go in the past. This time it being in my backyard, that was a different matter entirely.
And Rob, I'll tell you that I've been able to get guest passes to the NDGOP convention. Would have been 2018, I think it was up in Grand Forks. I was able to get guest passes, and again, I'm the former executive director of the Democratic Party and married to a Democrat senator, and was able to get.
I see lots of Democrats at the Republican convention, frankly.
What's that?
I see lots of Democrats at the state Republican conventions.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. A lot of people made fun of me and pointed at me and what the hell are you doing here? But that's part of the fun, right?
Right. Well, I'm sure it was pretty laughing. I'm sure it was kind of a camaraderie type thing. But I don't think anybody object. And again, that's the standard. And I don't want to beat this to death. Honestly, I didn't even want to write that column yesterday. I would have rather just gotten my media credentials and been prepared to go. And some people are encouraging me to go anyway. I don't. I'm not a confrontational person, right? Like if they don't want me there, I'm not going to show up and try to force the issue, because that's believe it or not, from my writing, that's not really my style. If I'm not wanted in a place, I'm going to report it, like I would otherwise. I'm not going to go and try to force my way into the room, but.
Well, Rob, speaking of conventions, and I assume you're going to the Republican convention.
Yes.
Are you at all concerned about how you're going to be treated there by some of the people who have been very aggressively anti-Rob Port over the last year?
Yeah. And really, in this environment, people said some really ugly things to me. More so, when you do this job, you're going to get some ugliness regardless. It's just how it is. And it's always been a little tense because going in, obviously I have an opinion on what's going on. And so one group, one faction might perceive me, but it's so super heated right now that, I expect that I'm probably going to get booed. I'm probably going to get some jeers. I'm probably going to have some people in my face. And I guess that's just part of the job. I'm not like in fear of my safety, but I think I'm going to get shouted at. Sure.
Well, in my real job at North Dakota United, we have historically had booths at both conventions, and we decided not to do it this year because of that reason. The idea of having to get into arguments with delegates at the GOP convention, we decided isn't something that we're all that interested in doing this year. And hopefully things calm down in the future and we'll be able to go back out and have real conversations with folks about the importance of public education.
Well, it's just not productive. All right, let's shift gears and talk about energy right now. And you and I had a little bit of a back and forth on Twitter. And let me concede part of the point to you. I think it's really unfortunate that the debate about energy right now has broken down into which singular person gets the blame, as if the oil markets weren't hugely complex and influenced by thousands and thousands and thousands of variables, some of which are obviously world leaders and policies and war. So when Joe Biden says that Vladimir Putin is to blame for gas prices going up, he's right. Vladimir Putin started a war in Ukraine. That war not only was disruptive in its own right, but provoked a very rightful economic response from the rest of the world to Russia that has included sort of isolating Russia's energy production from the national markets. Russia is a major supplier of energy. That's going to make prices go up. There's no question about that.
Right.
But where I think where Democrats get it wrong is pretending like restrictions on domestic energy production don't also play a factor. Both of these things can be true at the same time. And the Biden administration, in the very first days, and it happened right here in North Dakota, put a moratorium on leasing oil and gas on federal lands, which not only impacts federal lands, by the way, but as you would note from North Dakota's lawsuit that we have filed over this, that encumbers private minerals as well. Because if it's a section of land that includes both federal and private minerals, it all gets encumbered. None of it can be developed until those federal minerals are auctioned, and those auctions aren't happening right now.
Yeah, and I think one of the frustrations, and what I tweeted out was essentially Senator Hoeven had a press conference, it looked like, where Ted Cruz was full on bobblehead behind him. I thought that was the funniest part of the press conference. But he essentially blamed Biden for flaring and not having the infrastructure to take care of flaring so we can use that natural gas. And I hate it. It frustrates me, and it happens in the North Dakota legislature. It happens in at the federal level as well. Sort of the idea of, okay, now we're going to blame the guy who's in charge for this thing that's been a problem for 20 years that I haven't done. And it's like, okay, you've been a U.S. senator for over 10 years. Let's fix the problem, right? And you made the point about needing 60 votes and all that kind of thing. But when we simplify issues and don't have conversations, the amount of people I see that say, let's shut down any imports of oil from Russia, and then at the same time are bitching about gas prices, I don't think you get to do both of those things. And I'm all for cutting off imports from Russia. I'm all for drilling as much oil as we can in North Dakota. It's good for public schools. It's good for everything. But we need to have serious conversations about it. And you called me a little naive because I was like, the the politics of this thing.
I think I used crazy. A meme. I think I used a meme.
Yeah,
it was the Willy Wonka meme where he's like, "Are you new here?
Are you new here?" Yeah, yes. And but that was just it. And I just seeing sort of the simplistic way that folks are talking about gas prices. And again, I'm talking about the same thing probably happened when the gas prices shot up under Bush in the past. But this is a really complicated thing. And it also reminds me of when we're talking about the oil tax in North Dakota, and when the petroleum industry says, well, we got to lower this tax or else we're not going to drill here. The fact is you're drilling when the prices are high, and the prices have very little to do with what's going on in Western North Dakota. It's got way more to do with the global economy or whatever. You're going to drill if the prices are high, no matter if the tax rate is 5% or 6%. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I think you're downplaying the importance of the taxes. It is significant because it represents, those taxes look at the tidal wave of revenue that those taxes drive into the state government, and then think that you're taking that from that industry, right? Like you're taking, that is a burden that they carry, and they should carry. I think it's good that we get all that revenue, but the taxes matter. And more importantly,
it doesn't matter as much as price does. If it's 110,
it's not. But much like it's not either or. They both matter.
I think one matters a hell of a lot more.
Maybe. Maybe depending on the circumstance, depending on the situation. I think what's actually more damaging is this trigger nonsense that we do, where because oil prices are so variable, volatile, suddenly the tax rate can hinge on the price. I think that's stupid. Let's pick a rate and stick with it.
And that's fine, but the Petroleum Council thought that trigger was just fine when they're using
because
they
never thought they were going to
lower the rate.
They never thought they were going to hit it again. Is the miscalculation that they made?
And I think the other thing in terms of the oil production in here, and I think you had a conversation with Lynn Helms. We also have a worker issue, in Western North Dakota to be able to pump as much oil as we need to. So there's lots of factors,
lots of variables, right? Which speaks to my
Joe
point.
Biden.
It's not just Joe Biden. I think that's absolutely fair. It's not just Joe Biden, but we can't ignore, why are we not leasing oil and gas? That's Joe Biden pandering to a certain base of the Democratic Party. It's a bad decision, and it contributes to this problem that we're dealing with right now. It's not the variable. It's not the only thing that matters, but it does matter. And I think that's the problem. When we talk about energy, it's so hugely complex. You're talking about the lifeblood of our economy, how you get to work, how you get to school, how the groceries get to the store. It's all tied up in the oil industry. It is so complex. Very few people, I think, understand it, have a working knowledge of it. So everything gets dumbed down into these politically useful talking points on the right and the left, and it does us all a disservice.
Well, and that's exactly what frustrated with me with that clip from Hovind. And again, Biden pandering to a political position. He doesn't have a monopoly on that either. That's clearly what was happening there. With Republican senators trying to, simplify this in a way that, we can't negotiate with Iran or Venezuela. If we just simply do this one thing with the domestic production, gas prices will shoot down.
There's a lot of opportunism going on. There's a lot of people who are trying to use the Russia-Ukraine thing to advance some policy things that they've wanted for a long time. And even if I might happen to agree with those policy agendas, that's a little cynical. And I understand the frustration with that. I will say, though, I like to hear you say that we ought to drill for oil in North Dakota and obviously in America. And I think, one thing, I don't know if you read it in a recent column, but I think people have this notion that we're moving away from coal and oil. And if you look at global consumption, no, we're not. What we're doing is we are moving the use and the production of oil and coal and gas out of the United States and out of Europe and into places like China that produces a hell of a lot of coal, or into places like Russia or Saudi Arabia or a lot of these other places. And then we're feeling like super happy about it, right? Like we're patting ourselves on the back because, we're not drilling for oil. We kept it in the ground. No, we didn't. We just moved it somewhere else. We moved it out of sight, out of mind. And because we didn't want to look at it, we didn't want to deal with it. And I think that is such a mistake. If we're going to use this stuff, then let's make it and use it in the United States where we can control it and make sure that it's developed responsibly. Because I'll tell you, China does not mine for coal as responsibly, whatever you want to say about coal mining in the United States, it's a darn sight better than what's happening in China. Whatever you want to say about oil development and gas development in America, it's better than what the Russians are doing. So if we're going to do it, let's do it here. I don't understand why more people don't sign up for that argument.
Yeah, I also think that us having a real conversation about transitioning, and I don't think...
Have we been having any other conversation for like 30 years?
Well, but I don't know that we've made any progress. I mean, you've got one side that says, climate change is not real, so let's keep, going forward with the way we're going forward. We have to start having real conversations about that.
I don't think that's I think that debate has shifted. I mean, you look at what's the big focus in North Dakota, $30 billion in investments in carbon capture, right? I think there's an acknowledgement that we have to do something about it, but I think it's a rejection of this idea that we can just build enough wind turbines to power not only our present power consumption, but if everybody switched to Teslas too. That's not practical. That's not going to work.
And I think that the issue of practical is an important part of this, right? I think you and I have also talked about how much I like those union coal jobs over west of where I'm sitting right now.
Right.
We can't just tell a 55-year-old coal miner, hey, we're just going to train you up to do something different. That just doesn't make any sense. Democrats talking about we're going to put a bunch of coal miners out of jobs or out of business. There's a reason why Democrats aren't talking to people here. I like the tax revenue from oil. I like the tax revenue from coal. But I also think that we should be looking at continuing to diversify that mix to create the economic engine. And, I think sometimes we talk about all of the above while at the same time trying to shut down wind production in different places. So I think that, when we talk about all of the above, I actually mean it. I don't think we can just flip a switch and all of a sudden we're going to be all on solar and wind. And I like those jobs in Western North Dakota.
And I want to be clear. I don't have anything against wind turbines, but for the fact that I think Warren Buffett's he has a quote out there. He said the only reason to build a wind turbine is to collect the tax subsidies, and that's not far off the truth. What really worries me is that energy is so important, right? Your lights coming on when you want them to come on, your furnace kicking in when you need it to kick in. That is so important, and we're increasingly trying to shift our dependence towards an energy source that only exists but to collect tax subsidies. That bothers me. If we could build wind turbines because they work and they're reliable and they make sense for the energy grid, then that's fine. But I think we're far beyond that, and we're starting to build them for some certain perverse incentives in capturing a wind subsidy that the wind industry claims they don't need, but magically gets re-upped at the end of every year. That really bothers me, and so it's not hostility any more than you have hostility to oil and coal. I don't have hostility to solar and wind. I have hostility to the way we're doing solar and wind, which I think is divorced from reality.
Yeah, and I think doing the cost benefit analysis on what carbon is doing to the planet has to be part of that conversation.
Sure.
I think that, wind subsidies, I'm by no means an expert on it. Usually when these subsidies start, it's to get an industry off the ground, and then they're self-sufficient.
We've had them since the Carter administration, though. So
but I would also suggest that the fossil fuel industry does okay as well. There are zero production subsidies for coal or oil or gas. Zero. But are there other subsidies that they get in terms of research and development?
Sure,
and those
absolutely. And I support that for wind and solar too. I'd love to find better ways. Our battery technology, I'd love to find better ways. That I think is a big deal. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with we're going to pay you to produce a product. I think that's when we get into a lot. We're going to fund research on how to make your product better. That's a very distinct thing to we're going to pay you to produce your product, because that creates a moral hazard in the economy.
But those wind turbines up around Wilton, my son, when we drive by, he thinks they're really cool, that they look really awesome on the
so
landscape.
Does my son.
So are we taking that into consideration?
My daughter she always called them big fans. The big fans when she was little. She doesn't anymore. She's 14 now. Which means she doesn't talk to her dad much at all anymore.
But she still calls them big fans.
I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. She actually talks to me. We're going to a book signing on Thursday. for one of her favorite authors is coming through town. But yeah, that's again, I want it to be based on what works, and I am also very suspicious anytime we're picking an outcome in the marketplace based on what's politically popular. Politics do not have a good track record of managing an economy. They just don't.
And I think going back to my original point and what my frustration was this idea of blaming a problem that's been around for a long time on the current administration. It doesn't move us forward. I also understand that John Hoeven is in a political campaign right now as well. I'm not so naive to not understand that, but I also think it's a problem when people who are in a position to fix an issue continue to blame others. And again, it sort of reminds me of when we talked to Michael Howe, who's likely to be the next Secretary of State, and he was talking about the inefficiencies in the Secretary of State's office. I said, well, why didn't you do something about it as a legislator? I mean, those are the kind of things where it's like, all right, fix a problem, right? Yeah. And anyway.
Although sometimes, I mean, that's not a problem that's as fixable from, I mean, you have a secretary, I mean, anyway, it's always complicated.
Now I'm really shifting us off topic.
Now you're really shifting us off topic. Well, we need to wind things up. And I will just say, I do think it's possible to talk. I think it's possible, and that's not my job to be John Hoeven's communications guy, but I think it's possible for somebody like Hoeven to talk about what he was talking about. Just include some of the caveats, right? Just say, listen, this isn't the only problem. Obviously, what's happening in Ukraine is having an impact on prices, obviously. But this isn't helping either. Like, you could say that, and you could still be effective, and you could still make your argument while conceding the point. And then, honestly, I think in the long run, I think that maybe makes it easier for the Biden administration to come around and say, well, you know what, you're right. Thank you for acknowledging that Vladimir Putin's part of the problem, but you're also right in that we're maybe too restrictive on domestic production. I mean, maybe that's Pollyannish of me to think that's how that's going to go, but I think there are ways that you can make your arguments without resorting to just, lowest common denominator political bomb throwing.
Well, and I also think that one of the things at play with the energy industry is the lack of Democrats. Like we used to have Democrats from North Dakota, Montana.
John Tester, by the way, has been out saying we need to up domestic oil production.
Yeah. And so I think having more voices in that caucus in Washington was helpful historically in these things. But now I think it's Tester and Manchin are sort of lone voices in terms of energy production on the Dem side. I'm sure there's some others as well, but
some backbenchers in the House somewhere. But and one thing that does make it really hard is I think you're right. I wish there were more pro-energy Democrats. I mean, I think part of the problem, though, like it's the Heidi Heitkamp conundrum. Is Heidi Heitkamp pro-coal and pro-oil for North Dakota? Absolutely she is. I would generally trust her, even as one of her biggest critics. I would generally trust her in those policy areas. The problem is she gets into the Senate, she's a vote for Chuck Schumer to be Senate Majority Leader. And Chuck Schumer is not pro-oil and not pro-coal, and he sets the agenda in the Senate. That becomes the conundrum. I could vote for Kevin Cramer, who's going to be equally pro-coal and pro-oil, and is also going to vote for leadership in the Senate that is also going to be pro-coal and pro-oil. Mitch McConnell's from a coal state.
And I think you pointing out that the Dems need more people from energy producing, I would suggest the Republicans could use a few more pro-environmental people, right? I mean, I think that we used to be at a place where like McCain was sponsoring the climate change bills not that long ago. And so I think that we've just gotten to a place, again, this is another issue with the polarization. When Dems are representing a certain part of the country, Republicans represent another part of the country, and we're not talking to each other. We're living in different worlds.
Well, although that is one thing that I am very, I think that has shifted. When you hear Doug Burgum setting a climate neutral goal, that's part of what you're talking about. When you're hearing Republicans championing carbon capture, that's a shift and a positive one, right? I think Absolutely. It's a shift away from we're going to close our eyes and ears and pretend nothing is happening to, okay, things are happening and we need to do something about them, and here are our ideas for doing it. And who are they running into? They're running into the Sierra Club.
Well, and what has, to get to that carbon neutral sort of stance, I mean, beyond carbon capture, I assume we're going to have to do some stuff outside of that from a policy perspective to get to zero. But
I think some of it like flaring reduction. I mean, there's a lot of factors, and who knows if we'll hit it. I don't know, and it also depends on how you're measuring it too, because it's complicated, right? Like if you're measuring, does the exhaust from the trucks that are carrying the coal at the Falkirk coal mine, does that count as carbon emissions for Coal Creek Station? It's complicated, and we're out of time, so we'll have to tackle that in another show. Chad, as always, thanks for your time.
Rob, it's been fun. I mean, I think we've tackled some big issues between sexual harassment and the future of energy production in our country. I don't know that we solved anything, but it was a good talk.
Well, you definitely can't solve anything if you don't talk about it. So, all right, thanks. Yep. And
thanks, Rob.
Coming up on Friday, actually going to be talking, and now I just completely blanked on who my guest is on Friday. Shelley Lenz is going to be on, former gubernatorial candidate for the Democratic Party, now running as an independent. She's going to be on the show on Friday, so that should be an interesting interview. Thanks for listening. Want more political news like this? Visit inforum.news/port to get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Don't wait. Get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now.